Greetings, everybody. It's me, Steve the Amateur Historian. How you doing? I'm doing okay. It's May 30th, 2021. You know what that means? A new day, a new story. Didn't see that coming, did you? You didn't know I had that much energy left in my old broke down train wreck jalopy of a body. It's a new day, a new story. But before we get to that, remember as always to like, share, subscribe. You can hit up my Patreon and help me out there. Honestly, even if it's $1 a month, like, you have no idea how helpful that can be, especially if a lot of people jump on board and help in exactly that way. It helps me do more stuff on this channel, helps me be able to do more there, and I'm always posting stuff there for you in exchange for you helping me out. The link to my Patreon is in the description below, along with the links to my Instagram and Facebook pages closely related to the content I'm producing here on my channel, Steve the Amateur Historian. So all that said, obviously, I have a story for you today. So we're going back to 1974, and this is it's another story where everything that encompasses it goes beyond just the article that I found that was published on this date back in 1974. So there was a killer in prison named Carl Bowles, who, like, I've heard of him, like, I've probably seen that name just looking up, you know, famous killers from Oregon or something like that in the past. The name sounded vaguely familiar. And he was serving time in prison for murdering a police officer. And there was a warden at the Oregon State Penitentiary, a guy named Hoyt Cupp, which, if that isn't a good warden name, I don't know what is. But in his ignorance, I guess you could say, Hoyt Cupp decided to allow Bowles a brief pass from prison, which usually, if anybody gets something like that, they're usually in prison for something either kind of small or something where the crime they committed isn't going to put people in public in danger. You're usually not going to give a pass like that to a convicted murderer. And another dog. It always happens in this series. The dogs flock to me. Want to like, share, and subscribe, little buddy? No? He's like, I'm not allowed to use the computer. Anyway, so Hoyt Cupp, probably against anybody's better judgment, decides to give Bowles a pass to go visit his niece. It's only a couple hours pass, but that's all a criminal needs to start his runaway. It's truly ignorant. So of course, Bowles gets his brief couple-hour release to go see his niece, and he does. He goes to visit his niece, but he doesn't return. Big shocker. So even at the time that this piece was written, Bowles was on the run. He had disappeared. Nobody knew where he was. So even at this time, you know, it wasn't known if he was holding up a family somewhere, if he was out itching to murder again. He's out on the run, and who knows what he's capable of. Because he's obviously capable of murder. So, you know, obviously I wasn't there. I don't know this prison warden, but I know prison wardens are usually, you know, they're always held in high regard by the people that operate above them, even though some of them do horrendous things to prisoners. Granted, a lot of prisoners are worthless pieces of scum, but still, there's certain ways you should operate a prison, and then there's ways you shouldn't operate a prison. And, you know, when it comes to, you know, enforcing the law, whether it's officers on the street or prison wardens, officers working, you know, guards working in prisons, usually when they screw up real bad, as royally as Hoyt Cupp screwed up here, literally allowing a convicted murderer a wide open door to escape and be free on the streets again. You know, and if he kills again, that's on you, Mr. Warden. But, you know, as usual, I don't feel like the punishment quite fit the crime. Governor Tom McCall, who's pretty well respected as a governor, the decision came down to him what to do about Hoyt Cupp and his utterly ignorant decision. He decided to dock his pay for 2 weeks, essentially losing him about $1,000 pay, which is, you know, especially with, you know, what people made back then, that's a pretty big punch to the gut. But, you know, Tom McCall also had this, you know, string of like, well, I know people probably think I should relieve him of his position, which I kind of would agree. Like, this was not a small mistake. This was a very reckless decision that could have resulted in the loss of life had Bowles, you know, decided to or been put in a position where he felt he needed to kill someone for whatever circumstances. If he deems it necessary to kill someone, he obviously has no problem doing it. But Tom McCall kind of gave, you know, the usual political babbling, saying, well, you know, the last many years, the prison has been, you know, well run, and there haven't been any real issues, and, you know, other than this little mistake, Hoyt Cupp has ran, you know, he's been pretty flawless as a warden here at the state penitentiary, so I don't think we should fire him just for making one mistake. How many times have we heard that logic pushed in relation to horrible things that people have done, horribly reckless things people have done, but it gets swept under the rug as, oh, it was just one mistake. You shouldn't judge this based on one mistake. I wonder how Tom McCall would have felt if Bowles went out and murdered a whole family that next day. I wonder if he would have still been holding that position, as, you know, the people of the state just blindside him at every turn and say, you need to fire this guy. He let a murderer loose, and he in turn just went and murdered a bunch of people. That's a family that's murdered because of you. So, yeah, I kind of think Hoyt Cupp got off light with a dock in 2 weeks' pay. That's a slap on the wrist, as far as I'm concerned. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you think I'm being too hard on the warden. But it's not just... That's just one part of the whole thing. What's really kind of interesting is the time in which Bowles was free. Because he was actually free for a while, and the story is scatterbrained, and it's very entertaining, and it's primarily entertaining because nobody died during it. So you're lucky, Mr. Cupp. Nobody did in fact die before he was apprehended again, but still, it absolutely could have happened. So anyway, Mr. Bowles, he obviously goes to see his niece, but then him and his niece depart together, so obviously, you know, this was pre-planned. When he tried to get this pass to go visit his niece, it was blatantly obvious from the start what his intentions were, and her intentions as being an accomplice helping him. So he leaves, hooks up with his niece, and then they split. The two meet up in a local Salem motel, because the state pen is in Salem, or the Salem area. So the moment they hook up, they hop into a car and drive north to Portland. Well, I guess Portland. I'm not there anymore. And they obviously had connections up there, and they had some friends. So they go up there and they both stay there because, I mean, his niece is now an accomplice, so she's got to kind of, you know, be under wraps. So they actually hide out at a friend's house for a couple of days when somebody tells them that they know someone down in Eugene that can help Bowles in terms of staying free, staying out of sight. This guy is named Raymond Eaglin. And Raymond Eaglin actually went to prison for what he did for Bowles in this case. A lot of the information I found that I'm telling you now was from court documents in relation to Eagland, not Bowles, in relation to him and his efforts to get an appeal, because clearly he wasn't doing anything all that bad. But here's what happens. So Bowles goes from Portland down to Eugene, meets up with Eagland. Eagland and him get a bunch of camping supplies together, put them in a car, and they start heading off into the Willamette National Forest, which is just vast, endless acres of forested land. A place that not a lot of people are, and not a lot of people are going to come looking for you. Is the method that Eagland is going to help them with just that he's going to give Bowles a bunch of camping equipment and help him set up a camp in the middle of the forest somewhere? Not quite. Eagland, for whatever reason, maybe the guy was paranoid, maybe he knew the apocalypse was coming, I don't know. But Raymond Eagland had fashioned a bunker, an underground bunker, way out there in the forest. So he takes Bowles out there, he has his camping equipment, and Bowles climbs down into the bunker, and he's hiding out in this bunker out in the middle of the forest. And Eagland helps him out. He periodically brings him supplies, he brings him food. He also got a fake ID made out for him, which again, fake IDs were a lot easier to do back in the day. So he brings Bowles that, so it seems pretty obvious that at some point Bowles realized he was probably gonna have to flee the state, get really far away, or if he was maybe stopped on the street and someone thought somebody thought they recognized him, he could produce this ID and be like, no, I obviously just look like the person you're looking for. And Eagland, of course, makes sure to bring him guns and ammunition as well, in case, for whatever reason, the shit hits the fan. And Bowles is hiding out in the bunker for a while before, eventually having to come up with the next step in his plan of staying free. So it reaches June 13th, 1974. So Bowles has been free for like a couple weeks now. And his niece, as well as himself, because I assume his niece was hiding out elsewhere, because again, she's absolutely an accomplice in this now. So Eagland, I don't know if they were planning, they needed to plan something together or whatever, but Eagland gets Bowles out of the bunker and picks up his niece, and they meet up in Eugene at an apartment. Again, I can only assume the reason he's coming out of the bunker and they're all meeting up is they're trying to figure out their next course of action. During this time, his niece goes to the store. And while going to the store, she obviously wasn't thinking this through in terms of trying to stay under wraps. She bought some wine. So, purchasing alcohol, she had to produce her license to prove that she was of age to buy alcohol. So the person working at the store, gets a look at her ID, and she's recognized. And of course, she's considered on the run just as much as her uncle, Carl Bowles. So the police are notified, and they swarm this area. The niece is arrested. Bowles, who again was provided guns and ammunition, engages in a shootout with the police, wherein he manages to escape and he flees that whole area. In the court documents, it expresses that he obviously fled to Idaho, during which time he abducted and held hostage an elderly couple. They don't really elaborate further on that. It just says that, he abducted some elderly people in Idaho. So I don't know if it's obviously, I'm sure the information's out there, but I'm just taking it based on court document information. Because again, this is all just extra added on to the primary story that actually happened on this date, which was the Warden finally getting retribution, meek though it was, for letting Bowles go in the first place. So, not really much is explained, but just another little extra thing. He abducted an elderly couple. I don't know if it was he like needed a place to hide and he broke into their home and pulled a gun and was like, you sit tight and be quiet and don't let anybody know I'm here. But then he ultimately returns to Eugene. And it says that Bowles was apprehended there a couple days later. So it seems like he was apprehended while in Idaho. So I get the vibe that he probably like went into the home of these old people, held them hostage, was like, you know, I'm staying here, don't tell anybody. But whatever the circumstances were, he was ultimately apprehended in Idaho, fortunately without killing anyone, and brought back to Oregon. And a couple weeks later in August, it's finally found out, you know, Eaglin's involvement in this whole thing, and that he went to great lengths to harbor an escaped fugitive from justice who also just happened to be a murderer. And so he was apprehended in August, and in December of '74, he was convicted, along with, it said, 5 co-conspirators. So there was obviously a lot of other people helping out in this endeavor, and I can only assume that Bowles maybe had some money hidden aside. Money had to have exchanged hands. I don't think they would do all this stuff for him just to be, you know, just to have a bromance between criminals or whatever. But Bowles was obviously apprehended, brought back, and returned to prison. And, you know, the worst thing he did was he abducted an elderly couple that he didn't kill. So I guess Hoyt Cup got off easy, but I still don't think the punishment quite fit the crime. I mean, God, at least suspend the guy for a month. Do something. Come on, Tom McCall. Get it together. I'm yelling at a man who's been dead for a really long time. Damn you, Tom McCall. I've been vlogging too long today. But at least in the end, you could say it was a happy ending. The bad guy was apprehended and nobody died. That's always a happy ending, right? Right? I guess. And that is today's story. I hope you enjoyed, because I elaborated. I went beyond just the general topic of this particular date in history, but the aftermath of all that tied into what was going on in the aftermath. The fact that this killer was allowed to literally just walk out of the jail. And they'd assumed he'd come back after a couple hours. Never assume anything with criminals, especially if it's that they're willingly going to come back to the prison they're being kept at. Maybe that's the lesson to be taken away from this story. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting this channel, me, this series, all of it. And if you're new to the channel or just haven't done it yet, remember, give the video a like. It always helps. Subscribe. That always helps. Share my content around, if you desire. And hit up my Patreon. Remember, I'm always posting stuff there for you. Even if you're giving me $1, it helps. It truly does. It doesn't sound like it does, but it does. The link to my Patreon is in the description with this video, as well as the links to my Instagram and Facebook pages closely related to the content I'm producing on this channel. Steve the Amateur Historian. That's me, by the way. I guess in case you're new. Ooh, and all that said, one more time, from the heart, thank you so much for watching today. And till next time, this has been Steve the Amateur Historian. I'll see you tomorrow.